A second consecutive special win for the Tennessee program as they go to Athens and pull out an improbable win late 34-31 over Georgia. We bring in Mike LaValle. This is Mark Rogers, Mark Rogers TV, and also SEC Breakdown. Mike joins us from Last Word on Sports and also my colleague with SEC Breakdown. So, Mike, just two dramatic short drives for each unit on offense to make it just a dramatic finish. Can you kind of take us through the sequence when Tennessee was up 28-24, Georgia needing to score? Jacob Eason takes it from there.
Yeah, Mark, a tremendous last minute and a half of that game. It started out with Georgia punting with about 2 minutes to go, down 28-24. Some questionable clock management from Kirby Smart. Let's 2 downs go with the clock down. So Tennessee was able to run the clock down to just over a minute. Tennessee with 3 running plays right up the middle, a little bit of questionable play calling there, not going to the outsider or not letting Josh Dobbs exercise the read option package. Then Georgia gets the ball back deep in their own end zone. Jacob Eason driving, and with about 19 seconds left, Eason on 3rd and long. Tennessee's pass rush had been dominant the second half, but he had time, throws it about 55 yards in the air for a 49-yard touchdown pass to Riley Ridley in the corner of the end zone. Tennessee's cornerback lost the ball, kind of gave up on the play. The safety was slow and rotating over. So Georgia takes a 31-28 lead with 10 seconds remaining. And, of course, all Vol fans see the momentum and all the gains from winning Florida last week just disappear all of a sudden. So, and then some critical things that haven't been talked about much postgame. Georgia gets a 15-yard penalty on the celebration. That backs the kickoff back. They kick. Evan Berry gets it, returns it about 15 yards, and then an additional 5-yard penalty from Georgia's kickoff unit. So Georgia gave Tennessee about 20 yards plus the 15 yards from the return. So they gave Tennessee about 35 yards without any time expiring. That's really what cost Georgia the game. And then, of course, Tennessee with 1 play, 4 seconds on the clock. Joshua Dobbs goes back, plenty of time, throws a 42-yard Hail Mary. Juaun Jennings, the converted quarterback, goes up with no Georgia defenders in front of him. All the Georgia defenders were behind him. Goes up, high points the ball, grabs it, secures it, falls to the ground for one of the most dramatic Tennessee wins in a long time, ending a decade-long losing streak in Athens. Butch Jones's first road win over a top 25 team. All of this on the heels of a very emotional win in Knoxville against Florida last week. The Tennessee program right now has tremendous momentum and is feeling as good as they felt since probably the Clint Stoner stumble in '98. Tremendous time. It's going to be a great night in Knoxville, most assuredly.
So for a second consecutive week, Juaun Jennings makes a dramatic and critical play. 2 weeks ago against Florida in Knoxville, he makes the play with a juggling catch across the sideline where he stays in bounds and gives Tennessee the first lead of the game in that dramatic comeback. And then this one is the ultimate Hail Mary at a critical time, of course, with everything up in the air, and had to make a play and was the guy to do it. Lorenzo Carter was brought into the game for Georgia, probably the tallest player on the team, a defensive end. Inexplicably, he was in the very back of the end zone and really failed to make an aggressive play for the football on the Hail Mary. You mentioned Riley Ridley. It's interesting to note that he's a freshman who caught his first 2 collegiate passes in this game, so that was just his second career reception that looked like it was going to give the Bulldogs a dramatic win for them and get them back into the SEC Eastern Division race, and not Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee all with one loss. We want to mention to everyone that Mike produces a game grade for all the units for the Tennessee football team following each game, so you can catch that on Last Word on Sports, and he tweets it out. It's Mike L_LWOS, Last Word on Sports. So, Mike, let's take it through the offense. You can just kind of run us through how the Vols performed on that side of the football.
Yeah, Mark, I gave you the overall offense a B-. Overall, Tennessee was able to move the ball consistently, but they had the 3 turnovers, and that prevented the Vols from translating that consistent yardage into points. The Vols have been on the plus side of fumble recoveries this year. Jalen Hurd had the fumble at the goal line that cost Tennessee a touchdown. Of course, everybody's going to see that on the replays. Alvin Kamara had a key fumble that led to Georgia points, and Joshua Dobbs had an interception. So I gave the offense overall a B-. The key stat of the game, again, was the 3 turnovers. At quarterback, I gave Joshua Dobbs a B. His passing was pretty good, 61%, 61.5%, 16 of 26, I believe was the number, for about 239, 230, 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. Passing, I think he probably would have got a B plus or A minus. I've said this before. Joshua Dobbs doesn't have to win the game with his arm. He just has to be good enough. Of course, tonight he proved me wrong, but I think that was more Juaun Jennings. The thing that what I don't see from Joshua Dobbs is he almost seems like he's still on a pitch count from the coaching. They kind of got away from the read option, and Joshua Dobbs had no called runs to the edges off tackle tonight. He had 2 called runs, if I remember correctly, both up the middle. So it still seems like they're hesitant to run Dobbs as much as they could, and that's really Dobbs running off tackle is really what loosens up the defenses and really what opens up the Tennessee rushing attack. For the running backs, I gave them a C minus. Hurd and Kamara really couldn't find the holes very much. They had flashes of good plays, 6, 7, 8 yard runs, but in general, they couldn't find any room, particularly up the middle. Jalen Hurd finished the last 4 drives on the sideline. So there's going to be some conversation about that. Was it coach's choice or did he suffer an injury? The last play from scrimmage that he had was a touchdown catch where he wasn't touched. So it looks like it was a coach's decision to finish the game with Alvin Kamara in the backfield. Now that's C plus for the running game. For the receivers, and you have to include Hurd and Kamara in the receivers, I gave them a B plus. I mean, Juaun Jennings' final catch, that's worth an A probably by itself. But you look at the 2 running backs, Hurd and Kamara both had a touchdown reception, 6 catches between the 2, and I believe they had a total of 76 yards between the running backs. Preston Williams, Josh Miller, and Josh Smith had key 3rd down conversions. And, of course, Juaun Jennings' touchdown Hail Mary. When asked after the game, he said it was his 2nd most important catch of his career, right after the one where he burned Tease Tabor last week against Florida. So, Vol fans got a kick out of that. Offensive line, B minus. They were pretty good in pass protection. They couldn't really open a lot of running lanes. They had about 4 or 5 good run holes open for them. But they're getting better, much improved from week 1 and week 2. So they came in with a B minus. Overall, B minus for the offense, Mark.
Defensively, Derek Barnett took over the game against the Florida Gators last week. 2 sacks on this day. Malik Foreman with the interception off Jacob Eason. He gave up 211 yards passing to the freshman. Sony Michel had a decent day, 15 carries for 91 yards. Brian Harrion, also just a freshman, number 35 for Georgia, had a decent rushing day. So those are just the numbers. But taking it a little bit deeper, what do you think of the Vols' defensive effort?
Yeah, I gave the defense a B minus in this game as well. I talked to the offense was consistent. They couldn't just turn that into points. So the defensive side of the ball, I think, was opposite. I think they were inconsistent. The defensive line, you mentioned first, they were very good in pass rush, particularly in the second half. That second to last drive where Georgia was trying to take the lead, the defensive line absolutely owned Jacob Eason, a couple of sacks on that drive. But in the rushing attack, Georgia's offensive line, which came into this game struggling, they had not looked good, particularly against Nicholls State and Ole Miss. Georgia's offensive line was very effective in the run game against Tennessee's defensive line. So, again, the defensive line, good in pass rush, bad in the run defense, very inconsistent. Georgia had 392 yards total offense this game. That was my stat of the game. Linebackers, I gave them a C. Colton Jumper and Cortez McDowell had a great game against Florida. Not so much this game, a very average, mediocre game. Tennessee is still missing Darren Kirkland Jr. and Jalen Reeves-Maben, who might be out a couple more weeks. Word out of the locker room tonight. Colton Jumper and Cortez McDowell, the biggest deficiency they had was finishing the tackles. It looked like Tennessee's linebackers were trying to strip the ball more than they were trying to make the tackle, and that led to Georgia, instead of getting 3 and 4 yard runs, that led to the Georgia running backs getting 6, 7, 8, 9 yard runs for first downs. Big. It enabled Georgia to keep drives going and to win the time of possession. So very concerning with the linebackers. They'll be tested next week against Texas A&M, no doubt about that. Lastly, defensive backs. You mentioned Malik Foreman. On the inconsistency, Malik Foreman got the interception previous to that, and then he's the one that kind of lost the ball or gave up on the play for the touchdown with 10 seconds to go for Georgia. So again, another issue of consistency there. Todd Kelly Jr., who has been one of the strongest secondary players for Tennessee the last couple of games, gave up 2 big catches to Isaac Nada to include an earlier long touchdown pass to Nauta as well. So he struggled in coverage multiple times today. But the cornerbacks, after struggling in coverage to a good quarterback, Eason, but still a freshman, they were pretty good in the run defense. Talked about how the linebackers were kind of weak in run defense. The secondary came in and helped stem that Georgia rushing attack. So again, overall for the defense, B-, very inconsistent. They've been lights out, locked down in the second half. Tonight, not so much. Georgia was able to continue that momentum into the second half. So we'll see how that plays out next week in College Station.
Not as just a freshman, came into the game with 4 receptions, but based on what I saw, this kid could turn out to be an impact player, definitely at tight end in the SEC. Georgia goes to Columbia to take on a South Carolina team that showed some fight against Texas A&M. That was a decent ball game until mid-fourth quarter. Of course, you mentioned the date at College Station with the Vols going to Texas A&M, which suddenly turns into a huge matchup and also one of the more intriguing games in the SEC for the entire season, because I'm just looking forward to seeing these two teams mix it up. Texas A&M with a kind of a conservative approach against South Carolina today, got the job done on the road. Missing 2 wide receivers. Myles Garrett missed the game. They wanted to stay healthy, thought they could make it through against the Gamecocks on the road, which they did. Those guys should be ready for the Vols next week.
Texas A&M is going to present a real tough challenge for Tennessee. Their offense is very diverse, a decent run game, and they have probably what I think is the best receiving core in the nation with those guys. Texas A&M, the Aggie defense is also good, very fast and very athletic, which is exactly the type of defense you're going to need against Tennessee. Because Tennessee has the ability to leverage so many weapons against you, that athleticism is really going to help Texas A&M offset Tennessee's athleticism on offense and their multiple choices. Huge game for Tennessee. They now effectively have a 2-game lead on their 2 closest rivals in the East, Florida and Georgia, because the tiebreaker for each one. Florida and Georgia still play each other, so that'll be a de facto play-out game for the SEC East Championship. If Tennessee can beat Texas A&M with that 2-game lead, with their post Alabama schedule of South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Missouri, you got to think if Tennessee beats Texas A&M, they've pretty much locked up the SEC East. And with just Alabama remaining, you got to think Tennessee is going to stand a good chance at finishing at least 11-1 if they beat Texas A&M and be in the discussion possibly for a college football playoff position, and most assuredly a New Year's Eve 6 bowl game as well. So this what Tennessee hasn't experienced over the last decade is, as they continue to get these big wins, each and every game becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. That's going to be something that's new for this program, not new for the program, but new for this team, something they haven't experienced over the next couple of years. That game next week will probably be a matchup of 2 top 10 teams, as 3 top 10 teams will fall this week. Already announced by the league that it will be the CBS 3:30 game, 3 weeks in a row for Tennessee. So that's also impressive. So it's going to be another great game, big game, and it will absolutely test a injury-riddled Volunteers team.
Mike LaValle from Last Word on Sports grades out the Vols each and every week. Check that out on Saturday night on Last Word on Sports, the special teams, offense and defense. Mike gives the grades out and has other work there at Last Word on Sports. You can catch both of us on SEC Breakdown on Wednesday night, and the podcast on iTunes on Thursday morning, and analysis throughout the week, SEC Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook. Mike, we appreciate the time.
Mark, as always, thanks for having me. Another great week in college football.